And now we are going to move on to something really fun. This is Kenny Biddle, a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He is what I like to call a real-life Ghostbuster. He looks at a bunch of ghost videos, but also UFOs and other things too, and tries to figure out if they're real, if there's any obvious signs of fakery. And he's pretty good because he's pretty much self-taught on all these techniques. And more often than not, he figures out where people are trying to trick you. And he's going to be talking about the Force ghosts and what Force ghosts in Star Wars can do versus what supposed real ghosts in the real world can do, and how all those stories kind of influence each other. So I really enjoyed this talk when I looked at it earlier. I hope you will too. So Mitch, push the button, please.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Kenny Biddle. I write a column for Skeptical Inquirer magazine called A Closer Look, where I investigate claims of paranormal activity, whether it's alleged haunted houses or ghost hunting gadgets or maybe photos and videos of alleged ghosts and other things like that. I also dabble in Bigfoot and UFOs and stuff like that. So, but in this video presentation that we're going to do for the next 20 minutes, basically we're going to compare Force ghosts with real ghosts. And I put real ghosts in quotes because personally I don't believe that ghosts are real. But it's interesting to take a look at the comparisons between movie ghosts, not just Force ghosts, which are Star Wars specific ghosts, but ghosts in movie history in general, and seeing how they influenced our public's general perception of quote-unquote real ghosts, and how that general perception also influenced movie ghosts. It's pretty interesting once we took a deep dive into it. So we can't go too deep because it's only about a 20-minute lecture, but we're going to try. This presentation actually came from Russ. It was his idea. He had just finished watching Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, and we were discussing several points in it, and he brought up the idea of Luke's Force ghost. So I'm going to play the video here, but you can see in the scene that Rey is upset. She goes back to the island where Luke had previously exiled himself because she's going to exile herself now. She's done with everything. So as the ship that she came in on is burning because she set it on fire, she throws her lightsaber into it. And this is Luke's former lightsaber, which is also Anakin / Darth Vader's former lightsaber. But she throws it in there, and as you can see, Luke Skywalker catches it. Luke's Force ghost catches it. And it's interesting. It's brought up an interesting point because he's in the fire, and he's not being affected by the fire, yet he was able to affect a physical object that was in motion. And not only that, he's walking on the ground, which is cool because he's actually like interacting with the physical world and not interacting with the physical world because the fire doesn't bother him. He can walk through the wreckage, not a problem, but he's carrying the lightsaber that he just caught. It's interesting to go back and look at the evolution of the Force Ghost because in the beginning, the first time we saw a Force Ghost is in Empire Strikes Back. When Obi-Wan shows up on Hoth, Luke is freezing to death, and you'll see the scene here, and Obi-Wan just appears. And when he appears, he's kind of just like there. He's kind of free-floating in the environment. He's not interacting with the environment, he's just a visual representation, and he's talking to Luke, and we're not sure if if it's in his head or not, but anyway, he's not really interacting. And even later on in the film, where Obi-Wan shows up on Dagobah, and Luke's trying to leave because he saw that he had that vision where his friends are in trouble, and he's trying to leave, and Yoda is trying to convince him to stay. Obi-Wan shows up again, and as you can see in these scenes, Obi-Wan is just kind of free-floating. He's not in the background because it looks like there's a mound or something where he's not in front of it, but he's also, he appears like he's behind it, but he looks like he's in front of it too. He's just kind of floating. So he's not interacting with the environment. But when we jump ahead to Return of the Jedi, he's now interacting with the environment. As you can see here, when he walks from the swamp, he's pushing aside the branches that are hanging down and the tall grass that's in front of him. So now he's actually interacting with the environment instead of going through it or just floating there. So this is a concept that's very popular in the paranormal community, ghost hunting community, because they have this idea, this tribal knowledge, that ghosts can walk around. They can walk around a haunted house, but they can also walk through walls. And a very common story aspect is when there's modifications or renovations done to a house, and a ghost is walking down the hallway and walks through the wall at a certain point. And it happens all the time. And when the owners or ghost hunters or whatever do historical research, they learn through the history that the house has been modified or renovated, and there used to be a door right there, and the ghost is using the door to go into another room because that's where it was when they were alive. So it's an interesting concept how that translates over to the Force ghosts that we see. Now I want to take us back to the scene from Rise of Skywalker, where Luke's Force ghost, he's coming out of the fire and he catches the lightsaber. Now, I mean, I'm sure my fellow geeks will argue he's probably using the Force, and the Force is different when it applies to ghosts and stuff like that, but we're comparing here, so let's just go with me on this. So he catches the lightsaber, he holds it in his hand, he brings it forward, he's walking on the ground. This allows him to interact with the physical world again, just like walking on the ground, and being able to walk through walls. That gives you the best of both worlds. You can interact and not interact. You can pretty much do what you want. And that's a concept we see in movies or in ghost stories, because that's what the storyteller needs. So getting back to the concept, basically he's holding the lightsaber. And this is something that we've seen in other movies. Ghost, the movie Ghost, released in 1990, starring Patrick Swayze, is a great example of this. And I'm going to put a scene up here again. And this is the first part of a scene where he's in a subway. He's looking for another ghost because Patrick Swayze, his character is already dead. But he's already realized that he can walk through walls. People have walked through him. And he can go through solid objects. But he's still walking on the floor. He actually comes in the subway. He walks down the stairway into the subway, which is pretty funny. But there's another concept here. Not just that he can go through things and not go through things, but learning control, learning to affect other things. And you can see in the scene that the gentleman, the other ghost that he's trying to get help from, can affect the physical world at will. And he can hit newspapers, he can hit books or whatever he wants. And he even pushes Patrick Swayze's character several times. And they get into the how this is done. And this is a great concept too, because it influences the way modern day ghost hunters and psychics describe how ghosts can do things. So let's take a look at that.
What are you doing? What the hell are you doing? You're trying to move it with your finger. You can't push it with your finger. You're dead. It's all in your mind. The problem with you is you still think you're real. You think you're wearing those clothes? You think you're crouched on that floor? Bullshit! You ain't got a body no more, son. It's all up here now. You want to move something, you got to move it with your mind. You got to focus. You hear what I'm saying? How? How do you focus? I don't know how you focus. You just focus.
So this concept has been around for a long time, but the release of this movie really put this idea in the minds of our general population, and it solidified it in pop culture, I think, because it gave you a good explanation. And not only did it give you a decent and make sense sounding kind of explanation, but it was in the mainstream media. It was a major motion picture. It was a motion picture that was starring Patrick Swayze, who was big, really big at the time. And this is a concept that was duplicated by ghost hunters and psychics from this time on. The idea that ghosts can affect the physical world, but not all the time. You know, that they can really, if they focus, they can move books and doors and windows, and they can move tables around, and they can lift things and throw things around, causing poltergeist activity, even though poltergeists are a different concept altogether. But they can that ghost, real ghost, and again, real ghosts, can affect the physical environment. Even though they already are. You know, they're still walking around and this and that. So it's a pretty cool concept, and it shows how society, how our beliefs, maybe some religious beliefs or just beliefs in general, affected the writing of the movie or the writing of the script, and then the script embellished it or took it and ran with it, and then the film now influences the general audiences, and it becomes that vicious cycle where it goes around and around and around. So with that said, I want to move into how other real-life ghost stories have influenced modern day films and television, and then how that has in turn influenced real life. Again, I don't know why I keep using air quotes, I just like them. Anyway, so let me go way back to one of the first, and probably the first, written account of a ghost story. And this was written by Pliny the Younger, and he was a 2nd century Roman politician and writer. And he has I think there's several volumes of collected letters from him, because he wrote on every topic imaginable. He just wrote about everything. And in one of his letters, he wrote about this ghost. Apparently there was I don't know what kind of house it was, but it was a small house, but it had a reputation for being haunted. And it couldn't sell. They were trying to sell the house. Nobody would buy it. Nobody would rent it. Finally, this young philosopher came along and was not bothered by the stories. So he rented the place. And the ghost showed up. And this ghost, in particular, was an older man, and he was wrapped in chains. He had chains around his hands, his wrists, and his feet. And he would walk around and rattle the chains. So one night, the story describes this ghost showing up and walking into the room where this philosopher, he was just sitting there. He was sitting at his desk doing work, and the ghost rattled its chains and didn't get a reaction at first. So apparently it rattled his chains again, and the philosopher guy looked up and said, you know, hold on a second. Yeah, that's how it was written. Like, he actually went, hold on a second. So he finally finished his work. He looked up and said, what can I do for you? Basically, I'm paraphrasing here. The ghost motioned him to follow. So the guy got up, followed the ghost out into the garden, to a particular spot in the garden where the ghost looked down, kind of looked at the guy, looked down at this, and then disappeared. So an investigation the next day, they dug it up, and they found bones. A skeleton of a person that was wrapped in chains. And since that night, according to the letter, the ghost never showed up again. So this was the first written ghost story, documented ghost story. And we see elements of this in modern films like Stir of Echoes, where I think Kevin Bacon, he was in this film, and he was haunted by these visions and visitations from a ghost that was allegedly, or we find later, that was buried in his basement wall. The Sixth Sense, that entire movie is about ghosts that have unfinished business, that can't move on without a little bit of help from the living. So this is a concept that it was written about in real life, but it later influenced other stories and eventually movies. And this is a concept it's pretty much a standard theory. I'm using the slang term of theory. It's a standard theory for ghost hunters that a ghost or somebody that died with unfinished business, they're going to stick around. And they're going to continue to haunt a place until they get somebody to help them, somebody from the living side to help them, whether it's to pass on a message or to find a lost object or even to find their own body. So pretty cool concept there too, as well, how we take movie ghosts and alleged real ghosts, and we see the concept of them influencing each other through the years. These are good examples of just showing how the stories told in movies are influenced by real life stories, which are in turn, after the movie comes out, they have an impact on how real life stories are told. I've come across this concept a lot, where I go to a place that's allegedly haunted, and the story is that someone is buried on the property, and that's why it's haunted. The spirit's not at rest, and or somebody was murdered on the property and they were buried here secretly. No one knows where they are. That ghost haunts this place. And those kind of stories get told over and over again. They become tribal knowledge, they become legends, and they show up in like ghost books, like tons of ghost books like I have on my shelves back here. And they eventually get into movies and TV shows where the stories are embellished a little bit and added on, like Stir of Echoes and The Sixth Sense, where that you don't find that in real life. Those kind of concepts or those stories that are so intense, but they're made for entertainment. And even after those kind of movies come out, they will influence how other people tell stories from real life. One of a good example is Fort Mifflin, and Fort Mifflin has this rumor that in one of the casemates on the grounds there is a body buried in the wall. Now, a casemate, if you don't know, it's a big concrete brick structure, and it's a big mound not in the middle of the fort, but off to the side. But it was to protect all the gunpowder that was used for the cannons during the wars, and they basically have, when you walk in, it looks like this just half sphere that you walk through, half a cylinder. And you walk through it, and the walls are all cemented over, but the rumor is that somebody is buried in the wall. And that fuels the idea that the place is haunted. And that casemate in particular is haunted, and people get a lot of pictures and or video or audio things saying that, yes, it's really haunted by ghosts, because of this alleged body that's in the wall. But there's no record of it. There's no proof. There's nothing like that. But you can see how that kind of story will make it into a retelling, especially when ghost hunting shows, the reality shows, go there. They talk about the story. If they get anything strange, like dust particles, they promote that as something strange and unusual, and the story continues, and it grows and grows and grows. So there's one more concept I want to touch on before I end this presentation. And keeping with the comparison between film ghosts, which, yes, I know we started with Force ghosts, but we moved on to different films, and how they compare with, quote-unquote, real ghosts, we have to touch on ghost gadgets. How people look for ghosts. Modern-day ghost hunters use a plethora of technology where they believe that they are detecting and capturing and measuring ghosts. But if we look in history, it started with simple stuff like candles, lighting a candle and putting it in the middle of the room to see if there were unexplained breezes, even though they like places like Society for Psychical Research, when they investigated claims, they would lock down the room. They would try to seal up all entries, windows, and any kind of air leaks. They would seal it up and light a candle to see if anything would blow the candle out. Flour was another thing. You spread it on the floor to see if anyone would walk in the room overnight when no one was paying attention. This was a very low-tech kind of investigation. It was hands-on, but it was low-tech. Fast forward to 1984, and you have the movie Ghostbusters that comes out. And that's a phenomenal movie. It's huge. If you haven't seen it, I don't know what's wrong with you, but it's a great movie. It still holds up. It's beautiful. But it's very, very tech-driven. The guys use technology to track ghosts, and they use technology such as this, a PKE meter, which I believe stands for Psychokinetic Energy Meter. And that's where the concept was popularized. It got into mainstream pop culture from that movie, and it influenced how ghost hunters in real life decided to shift to technology. We didn't have PKE meters, but we had other things like EMF meters. And these little devices are what replaced the movie version of the ghost detector. And that evolved into other kind of technology where you were testing for static electricity, or little devices that create their own EMF. And if you get close to it, it would set off an alarm, just like a theremin. So this concept is pretty cool, seeing how old school ghost hunters used very low-tech stuff, and that influenced the movie Ghost Hunter or Ghostbusters, saying, you know what, we can bump this up. We can use modern day technology, 1980s technology, and we can do the same thing and do an entertaining film. And that in turn influenced pop culture or the general audience and said, oh, we can use technology to find ghosts. And therefore, you now have all your ghost hunting devices that are out there. And I mean, some of them, there's ones that are out there that are costing $200 or $300 just for one device. And it's not even tested or proven. It's just based on the idea of ghosts. So, I guess to wrap this up, we've seen over the last few decades, or actually, I mean, since Pliny the Younger, I mean, we're talking like 2nd century. So over the last couple centuries, we've seen how real life stories will influence the media. And that could be writings, books, letters. It could go into plays. It could go into theater. It could go into movies, television, radio programs, like the old radio programs before TV. How real life events, and again, real life events, because we don't know for sure, but how they would influence these stories that were popularized, how they were made famous or made popular. I'm sorry, I can't say that word. Made popular in the media, and how the media influenced our perspective, the general audience's perspective of how ghosts are supposed to be. And this whole thing, this is a big rabbit hole that you can go down, and 20 minutes is definitely not enough to explore this concept fully, but I hope this presentation was entertaining at least, and it gave you an idea or some things to think about or look back on. And in the end, I hope you enjoyed it, and that's it. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kenny. Once again, everybody, I see one good question already in the chat that I want to ask. Anybody else, put the question in all caps in the chat, and we'll make sure it gets asked. I will unmute Kenny right now so we can get him up here for a couple questions. Kenny, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, great. I didn't even have to conjure you with a sentence. So there are some people out there who don't like you, apparently.
I saw that like, wait a minute. I was like, I don't think that was part of my original.
Because that wasn't in your original draft. I would have caught that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
No, but it's funny though, because you don't just kind of do your stuff in a vacuum. You actually go out and you meet the paranormal investigators and talk to them, right?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I go out to conventions.
Is that similar to what we saw today? Do you get about the same reaction?
No, I mean it's. I guess it used to be like that. It used to be a lot of hate. And why am I here? Why do I bother showing up at paranormal convention if I don't even believe in anything? And I think in recent years it's shifted to curiosity, and I think a lot of that community is sick and tired of the bullshit that they see on TV, and they want answers. They want logic and reason. They want to know more. So they come out and ask questions.
I do want to push back on one thing you said.
Sure.
I have not ever actually seen The Last Jedi. I don't know if that hurts my cred or helps it. But the suggestion for this article actually came from someone from AIPT. They said, now, wait a minute. The Force Ghost is holding the lightsaber, but he's not feeling the flames. Is there some like physics thing there you can do? And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but I might have a better idea. Let me get my ghost guy on this and see what he can do. I'm so glad I have a ghost guy. Thank you. And so I think it was probably a challenge that you weren't expecting, but I think you did a great job with it.
Yeah, because I'm used to going after a mystery and just tracking down like all the facts and background and putting it all together so I can solve that mystery. And this was more of a comparison with movie culture and general beliefs. So I wasn't used to doing that kind of thing. And it gets me out of my comfort zone, and I like that. It's a challenge, so it makes me grow from that, and it was fun. I mean, it was weird even doing this video, the presentation. I was like, what the hell am I going to do? How do I do this? Okay, well, let's figure it out. Let's start comparing and and then I was like, oh, well, I mean, I edit videos all the time. I can make an actual good presentation. I can plop in little clips, and pictures and stuff, and we can go off of that. So it turned out really well.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm glad you ended up with the ghost gadgets. I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Thankfully, Nathan Andrew already asked about it. I wonder if Ghostbusters' use of tech came from Poltergeist, which came out 2 years earlier.
Yeah, I think Poltergeist, and I'm not an expert on all this, but Poltergeist was more, I think it gave that parapsychology from a university kind of feel, because it's like these guys came in and they were studying this phenomenon. They set up a whole bunch of equipment, which I really don't know what the equipment was in the movie. It's kind of just, I think it was more for show, but it gave that university feel that like we're part of a university. And you're right, because Ghostbusters, I mean, they originated from a university department, before they went into business for themselves, busting ghosts. So yeah, I think it was a nice flow, but it also I think Ghostbusters was just more, it was more appealing. Poltergeist was a straight up horror movie, and the parapsychologists that they brought in were a very small part of it. Whereas in Ghostbusters, they are the main characters. They are the main drive of the entire film, and they love their tech, and they use it throughout the entire film from the very beginning. When we go to the library scene, I mean, they're using tech. So
yeah. And the funny thing is, though, that Egon has built a special device, of course, the PKE meter, to detect psychical energy, or however he puts it. Yeah, there it is. Does it light up?
It does. So yeah, you hit the button. There you
go. Oh, you're full of it. Look.
It's all over the place.
But of course, quote unquote, real ghost hunters, they just take out what? Thermal meters and EM meters, and they're like, oh, there's a ghost. Yeah,
there's a lot of just borrowing from other fields, almost like they just don't know what they're doing. And I think the EMF meter was the closest equivalent to the movie version of this. So it was much easier to get. It was cheap. The first ones, I think I actually have. I have a Dr. Gauze. So that's one of the early cheap ones that you could pick up for like $10. And then you had the K2, which they became popular from the show Ghost Hunters. But these were kind of cheap and people could use them. They're not good tools. They're very analog. There's no data logging. There's no accurate measurements. And they do have a calibration to them, which most ghost hunters just ignore completely. So that's a big deal. So I think, this adoption of equipment was more to be, hey, look, we're professional. We have all this scientific equipment. It's really cool, even though 95%, and I'm just throwing that off the top of my head, most of them just don't realize how it works, how this equipment works, how it's supposed to be interpreted, or what can cause it to go off.
Yeah. Obviously not designed to detect ghosts, so you're using it for an off end. And we can't even agree on what a ghost is. So
right. I mean, you're just as much to find a ghost with a toaster than an EMF meter.
Why not?
So
Dave has a question. Why do people think ectoplasm is even real? Is it based on any science or discoveries? I would say today probably nobody thinks ectoplasm is real, but the story of it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that started with your spiritualism and your seances, where mediums were producing it out of various orifices. And if you start getting into the history, you can see it's pretty much coming out of every hole. So it's the idea of it, I think, was just fantastic at the time, because we're talking about like the early days of photography too. So it's not like everyone had a camera in their pocket. And Seances were done in the dark, like complete darkness, so you couldn't see anything. And occasionally they would turn on a very dim light, so you could see this weird, strange thing coming out of the medium, and it freaked people out. But then somewhere along the line, that dropped out of favor, probably because they were getting exposed like every turn. More people were journalists were sneaking in and taking photos during these seances and exposing them, showing that it was cheesecloth and other substances like that. But along the way, ectoplasm went from this cheesecloth kind of substance that was a physical object that was planet, and it became this smoky visual representation that modern ghost hunters were getting on cameras. And I don't know where the transition was made, but it was a really crappy one, because it was something cool in the beginning, even though it was fake. But then it went to like a really like cheesy, silly optical effect.
It's funny how that works as the technology advances. All the cool stuff seems to go away.
Right.
It's kind of like with UFOs. It's like now that everybody has a high-powered camera, you don't see saucers anymore. You don't see triangles. It's these little bitty point sources of light that could be, I don't know, drones, maybe.
Same with Bigfoot. You know, like you would think since the Patterson Gimlin film came out that we would have better pictures and video, but no. I mean, there's still the quote unquote real stuff is still blurry. It's still out of focus. It's still horrible and at a distance. And then the fake stuff is just so painfully obvious that it's fake.
Well, we're gonna have Jeb J. Card on during the James Tynan's Truth panel at the end of the day, talking about paranormal Bigfoot. So maybe he can give us some ad hoc, hand wavy reasons for why Bigfoot makes all his photos blurry.
Sweet.
Thank you, Kenny.
You're welcome.
Much.
And may the force be with you.
All right. Thanks, Kenny.